Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. It's such a pleasure to have all of you with us this evening on this really historic and momentous occasion in the life of the Louhs. So we're so grateful to be to have you with us on this Tuesday, March 19th. If you are new to Live with the Louhs, it's a show that merges both faith and psychology to help give you some practical principles that you can live by in your walk of faith every single day. So once again, thanks so much for being with us. And before we dive into tonight's really cool and just historic night for us, I do want to encourage you all throughout the week to stay connected to us on our social media platforms. You know, friends, we are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all under the headings of the Louhs. And in fact, all of our sermons are archived on our YouTube channel. That's at the Louhs as well. And you can subscribe to it, actually. We'd love to have you do that. And also, if you're looking for some daily inspirational messages, we started doing this, what do you say, Roxanne, about several years ago, we started to send out these messages. Mm-hmm. And we hope and pray that they're just very practical for you. And so if you're looking for, especially during this season of Great Lent, a time in which we reflect on our own spiritual walk of faith and our relationship with Christ, if you're looking for some help with that, we definitely encourage you to subscribe to our messages by going to our website at thelouhs.com. That's LOUHS.com/subscribe. And all you have to do is simply put in your email address, and every single day at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, we will send you that day's inspirational message. And today,
I do want to give a shout out to all those who've written in about those inspirational messages. For all of you tuning in, I mean, your words are so edifying to us. And so I really thank you for your reactions, your suggestions, hey, more on that one. We really enjoyed that. And listen, that guides what we write. And so we're writing every day. New blogs come to mind. I always talk to Father about this. On my runs, they kind of just drop from the sky and we talk about them in sermons. And so your words really continue to sort of inspire where we go. So please continue with your suggestions. We love it. And we're grateful to hear from you guys all the time.
Yeah, it's such a, especially when you keep writing it, and with email, there's not really much response back other than through your email. So it does help us to know that you're actually benefiting from it and that you like them. So again, if you are interested, go to our website, thelouhs.com/subscribe, put your email address in, and you'll receive that daily message. So today is such a special day for us. I think it's been about 6 years, Roxanne, when we started 6 years ago when we began writing our first book called Renewing You, a Priest, a Psychologist, and a Plan. And really, friends, the impetus behind writing that book was our dads were battling cancer. Many of you may already know that story, but Roxanne's dad was diagnosed the same week as my father was with cancer, and they'd go to be with the Lord about 8 months apart from each other. And really, our personal struggle as a priest and psychologist with just navigating how to deal with that. It's one thing to give advice to people, but when you're crawling through the valley, as some may call it, that's when your faith is truly tested. And so it was that way for us. And we realized that if we as a priest and psychologist were struggling just to kind of give ourselves comfort and guidance on this, that I'm sure that many people were as well. So we started that book basically taking the 8 of the biggest principles that we see as a priest and psychologist and addressing them from a faith and psychology perspective. But over time, as we saw, whether it be through retreats or just in speaking to friends, and really it came on our own heart, was that there was always this question or this void about how do we deal with the dark seasons of life? How do we deal with those things that it's not really a matter of if, as we know, Roxanne, it's really when. We oftentimes say that, you're either in a dark season, you're going to be in a dark season, or you're coming out of a dark season. That's just, sadly, that's the way that we kind of experience on this earth. And one of the amazing things about our Savior, Jesus Christ, is that in everything that he does for us, even on the darkest day of his life, we call it Good Friday or Great Friday in the Orthodox Church, but there was nothing good about it for him. It was good for us, but awful for him. But even in the midst of all of that darkness that he was experiencing, all that sadness and all that torture and anguish that he would experience, he thought about you. He thought about you and he thought about us. And he writes, or he says, these 7 statements. These are 7, at least recorded statements. He could have said more, but there are 7 that are actually recorded within the Scripture that he writes about and that he talks about. And we basically write about those topics in our brand new book called 6 Hours, 7 Lessons, How Christ's Light Transcends Our Darkness. And tonight we're so honored to have 2 dear friends of ours, and then later on another friend of ours, who not only are friends of ours, but they're people that were willing to read our book, and not only read it, but felt that it was worthy enough to endorse it. In fact, their endorsements are actually in our new book. And just as a little promo, that's the way our book looks. It's 6 Hours, 7 Lessons. And so we're so grateful to have Dr. Randa Anderson. She is the president of the Orthodox Christian Association of Medicine, Psychology, and Religion. She's with us this evening. And Dr. James Skedros, also a dear friend of ours, who was a former professor of mine, and who is also a professor at Harvard, as well as at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology. And so to Dr. Randa and Dr. James Skedros, we thank you so much for just your love and your support, and thank you for being with us this evening.
So really, as I look at the 2 of you, you both inspire me so much, and we look at your disciplines as sort of the merging of us, and faith and psychology, and both Orthodox Christians, and that's why we just look up to you both so much, and for the work that you both do for our national church, and really for the world, and so. Let's start with you, Dr. Randa. I'd love to hear, your thoughts personally, but also as a professional working with people whom you watch every day walk through difficult seasons of life. I mean, most people don't end up in a psychologist's office because they're having a great day or are in a good chapter of life. And so, would really love to hear, your impressions on, what this book would mean for somebody knocking on your door.
Well, first of all, congratulations. It is a wonderful book, and I'm excited to share it, not just with clients, but with friends and family. And I think what it will mean to people is an opportunity to grow, to have comfort, to really connect with the fact that Christ died for us, that he suffered as we suffer, and that he's there in the dark times. One of the things I love about your book is that it's so empowering in how you challenge the reader to think about their own situation and how they're thinking about their own situation. And yet at the same time, this isn't the kind of self-help book that's all about the self. Right? It's also about how we can lean on Christ, how we can hear his comfort in those words on the cross. I mean, how long do you want me to talk? I can keep going, but I think that people will connect with this book. Absolutely. I certainly did. And not just as a psychologist, but as a human being, with my own challenges and struggles.
That's so helpful to hear. That was the goal, that in every moment we're able to kind of look back, not at trying to get back to a better self, but to get back to the version of Christ in us, and who would Christ want us to be in these seasons? What would he want us to remember? And how far off, have we strayed in those moments? Because every one of those statements and every, chapter is something that we ourselves struggle to do,
right.
Which is just so interesting that he's sort of commented on these 7 things, because I feel they're things that we do struggle to do in regular life, but also, in our dark times.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, Randa, as you were speaking, I couldn't help, but I'd love to get Dr. Skedros involved as well. I think for so many of us, it's easy to have that kind of faith, when everything's going great in our life, and it's when there's no problems, and it's, but then we all have that one day, just like that we have our own Fridays, where like Christ on that Friday on the cross, we experience all that. And I just find it so amazing that we worship a God who, I love Romans 5:8, where it says that that God demonstrates his love for us, that while we were still sinning, he comes and saves us. Like, he didn't just tell us that he loved us by words, he demonstrates it and he shows it. And Dr. Skedros, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts. I mean, I think so much as Orthodox Christians, we focus, which as we should, on Pascha, on Easter. And sometimes you know, it's easy sometimes to focus more on the resurrection as opposed to the crucifixion, which, as I mentioned, I think we should. But there is no resurrection without the crucifixion. And maybe just talking a little bit about how important, you know, theologically for us to kind of look at the cross of Christ as a sign of victory, but also what Christ did to give us that victory.
First of all, it's great to be here. So thank you very much. And thanks for the honor tonight. But in response to your question, your observation, St. Paul had the same question in the sense that in 1 Corinthians, you know, one of his first letters, he's trying to explain to the Corinthians the power or the foolishness, the joy, the suffering, the salvation of the cross. The cross has been a conundrum for Christians from day one. It was a conundrum for the apostles. The apostles themselves fled, right? They didn't want to be a part of that event. They were fearful. And they're not there as the Gospels tell us, except for the beloved disciple John.
Right.
So I think even at the moment of Christ's crucifixion, it's a conundrum. But in the Orthodox tradition, we see the cross as both sorrowful and joyful. We see it as both triumphant and suffering. We see it as something that we're called to pick up. Christ tells us to pick up our cross, and there's a reason that he chose to choose that word, cross. He could have said, pick up your burdens, pick up something else, but there's a reason he said the cross, knowing he would be on the cross. And there's a power in the cross. And as you said, we can't get to the resurrection without the cross. The question really is, why the cross? That's the real question. And that's the question that your book doesn't answer it in the sense that because our individual crosses, we always look for the answers of why. And sometimes we don't know. And you've said so beautifully in your book in several places that we don't necessarily know the answer why. We just know that we go through it. And as Christ experienced on the cross, at the very end, he says it's finished. But it's not finished. It's the Greek word is completed. Something's completed on the cross. And our theology tells us, our faith tells us that for whatever reason, God chose the cross as the instrument through which our salvation would be realized through the last time of the spilling of the blood for the people of Israel, for this sort of last and final sacrifice, that we don't need to sacrifice animals, things, anything again, that Christ sacrificed for us on the cross. It doesn't necessarily take away our pain, because we will all suffer, as you have all said beautifully and so poignantly in your book. I don't have answers other than what Paul says, you know, that there's victory in the cross, even though it is a stumbling block.
I love it too.
It is a scandal. It's a scandal.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love it during the Divine Liturgy when we say, "For through the cross, joy has come into this world." And I think that just is a beautiful image, because especially in the West, where you see so much of of Christ on the cross and tremendous pain, tremendous anguish, and obviously that we see that as part of that he did experience that. But I think the beautiful thing within the Orthodox iconography is that it's not Christ being carried by the cross, but Christ himself carrying the cross, as we know so well. I know, Dr. Randa, I oftentimes think about just, you know, how often many of us can feel forsaken. We spend a great deal of time on this chapter of forsakenness, and at times, how all of us at times can feel lonely or feel abandoned. And, you know, in your practice and in your work, I mean, how often do you, you know, I know that the U.S. Surgeon General actually said that loneliness is the number one epidemic facing our country right now, that America is struggling with loneliness. How did you find the words of Christ comforting or able to be comforting to those people that are that come to you that are struggling with loneliness? I think that all of us at some point can feel that way, but those that are struggling with a special loneliness, how beneficial was that chapter, you think, for someone that may be struggling with that?
Yeah, well, I think that chapter, really, like all of them, is beneficial in part because of all the questions you have throughout. So when the reader picks up this book, whether they're experiencing loneliness or you know, some other heartbreak or challenge, what they're going to get is not just wisdom from both a psychological and biblical standpoint, but also questions to reflect that can help an individual understand, well, why am I lonely? Why am I in this situation? And what can I do to change it? I think the guided questioning throughout is really helpful to getting through whatever it is, whether it's loneliness or something else.
I love that, too, as a therapist, you pick up on those questions, because that's always the question I have with guidance is, okay, but who am I in that piece of wisdom or guidance? Okay, connect. But how do I do that if I'm an introvert? How do I do that if I'm anxious? How do I do that if I don't have community? And how do I do that if I'm a widow? And how do I do that because I think all of our circumstances are different. And so that is the hope, that people would be able to literally pause, throughout the book, at the end of each chapter, to just pause and rest. And so, I don't know about you, Nick, but I, again, like with Renewing You, I don't know that it's a book you can kind of get through, quickly, because there's a lot of pausing that's supposed to happen.
Yeah. And actually, I think what I said in my endorsement is this is not a book to be read passively at night before you go to bed, right?
Right. That's right. You did say that. Yep.
I hope readers sit in a comfy chair with a cup of tea and a highlighter and maybe a journal right next to them also, right? Because you read the words, you read the wisdom, you read the scriptural references and the quotes from the saints that you've incorporated so well throughout. And then you reflect. What are the 3 R's you say?
The rest, reflect, and respond.
Yeah. And who are you talking to? You're not going to talk to yourself. Pull out your journal, right?
Right.
And
right.
actually do some of that reflective work, that exploration, and that understanding.
I love that. Go ahead, Dr. Skedros.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question, not a question, but an observation. Maybe it is a question. So about loneliness and about abandonment. And I think what I found really powerful about this chapter is the sense that it brings out what you're trying to do in the book, which is connect theology with praxis, making what our faith teaches real in our daily lives. And on a theological level, for me, of the 7 words that Jesus, or sayings that Jesus speaks, it's this one of abandonment that I find the most powerful. It's this one at which I find Jesus, and I would add, I'd never really thought of this until I read your chapter on thirsting, but I would add thirst to that as well, because it's these two phrases, these 2 chapters that really reflect Christ, the Son of God, as being human. And to me, it seems the greatest I don't know, I haven't suffered like a lot of people in the world. I'm a fortunate American, middle class, older white male. So I have never really suffered like people have suffered. But to me, Christ on the cross, abandonment, to me seems to be the greatest suffering. He's there alone. There's loneliness, but there's abandonment. Where are you, my God? Where are you? And I think we've all been in those moments, maybe not to the extent that Christ is, because Christ is, his Father has abandoned him. And to me, that is what theologically we are told that, and Gregory the theologian says this, that if Christ doesn't assume every aspect of human nature, every aspect of human nature isn't healed. And so our abandonment is healed because Christ has assumed it. Now, how do we put that into praxis? That's where the ministry of the theology we're taught, of the message from Scripture, is put into practice. And that's for you folks. But you understand what I'm trying to say, though. Absolutely. But what I love about the book is that you do both. That both is taking place at the same time. And so really the book can be personal. I could read it individually. and, with the pen, already said, and at night, but it also be read as a group, as a study, during 7 weeks during Lent, in a study group, because it would be theological. It is theological, but it's also very practical.
That's a great idea, as a study group. And yeah, I mean, that's something that I see and practice a lot. In fact, and I think you've coined this in your sermons before, that, we talk about, crowning God, giving him back his throne, that at times, we don't have him on the throne of our lives. And when he says it is finished, I mean, he is taking back his crown, and we sometimes forget that he is on the throne of our lives. And I use that in practice a lot, that we have put something else where he's supposed to be sitting. And you've said that a lot, because we call him, the king over our lives, but, at times there are things that really, really block our willingness to surrender to that, in our lives. We don't see him as being on the throne of our life. Something else is more important, is guiding us, is leading us, is directing us. We bow down to it. And a lot of times we're not even aware that we're doing that, or that we're living that way. So we don't have a peace about surrender. I do think surrendering is also, one of the most difficult tasks that we have as human beings when we don't like something. When life has tossed us circumstances that, we want to change. And, certainly we've been in that boat ourselves. And so those chapters too, for us, the it is finished, and learning to surrender and put him back on the throne of our lives. I'm sure you both, see that from a theological perspective and a psychological perspective. It's hard to surrender, and it's hard to actually experience him as king, in the way we live our life, and to truly allow him to assume that throne in everything that we do.
Well, and I think too, Roxanne, that's one of the beauties of Great Lent. I think one of the things that I like to oftentimes tell, I speak to this to myself, but also, during to the people that are in our parishes, Lent is really an opportunity for us to put Christ back where he belongs in our life. It is putting him back as the king over our life, because so many other things are trying to occupy space in our life, and we tend to put these things there. And I love how our church, and I know Dr. Skedros, you've been on our show many a time talking about this, the history of Lent, but I love how the church kind of, in some ways, and this may not be necessarily the most theologically correct, but the church kind of maybe recognizes that on our own, we don't really do a good job of doing this. So the church says, okay, well, we're going to insert a season in here to make sure that you guys will actually work
at this.
Yes, we'll give you an opportunity to help do that and to put him back on the throne. I definitely agree with you, though, Dr. Skedros. I think that for me, loneliness was the chapter that for me, all of them spoke to me in my own life, but I felt myself pouring so much into the, my God, why have you forsaken me? Probably more than any of the other chapters, because I think that every one of us can experience loneliness. I remember when I was at the seminary in the 90s, and you were there, obviously, but I remember, my first several months there, my dad was not a really big fan of me going to the seminary. He was kind of like of the old mentality to think, why do you want to go be a priest? It's a hard life. Go do something else, So he said, basically, long story short, he said that, if you go get a degree, an undergraduate degree, and something that you can actually make some quote unquote money on, then you can go to the seminary. That way, if you don't do well there, you can go back. But
fall back.
Yes. So when I went to the seminary, though, I have to be honest with you, and I've shared this on several different occasions, but my first several months there, I really had a hard time connecting with people. It was just, I had a hard time connecting with the administration. I had a very difficult time connecting with, just in general terms, with other students. And it was nothing on their end. It was just more me. I had never been away. And there were many, many times with the stress of the school, the amount of schoolwork, I'm talking about the academic work, as well as just the difficulty of being away from home and all the other things, that I truly felt lonely. And at that same time, my grandmother had died, who I was very, very close with. So the point I was making is, in some small way, and again, nothing compared to what anything in the hemisphere of what Christ was enduring, but I felt so lonely that on several different occasions, I had packed all my stuff in my dorm room and was ready to leave. And I'll never forget, my father and mother came, I think sometime during October or November, I can't remember when, to the seminary of my first year. And Right when I saw my dad, I began to cry, and my dad was like, "Okay, well, let's go. You're ready to go." This because he wanted me to go back anyways. And my mom's like, "No, he's going to stay there, and that's it." But I'll never forget my mother telling me, she's like, "Nick, just because you feel alone doesn't mean you are alone." And it wasn't, necessarily a powerful statement so much as it was just a really authentic statement. And it really took time for me to kind of say, "Wait a minute, I'm not alone." And obviously, we have Christ who endured that loneliness to show us that we are never alone. And obviously, my classmates now, but I share that with you because there was a level of loneliness, depression, I would argue, at times, and sadness that I experienced on my own that really kind of helped pour into that chapter a lot of what I wrote in it. And I think that's something that we can all experience.
Well, and really the difference between feeling forsaken apart from God and also feeling disconnected from people, it sort of, we kind of go in both directions in the books. I think they're a different experience, right? We can feel close to God and completely alone in this world. And we can feel sometimes disconnected from God and very connected in this world. And sometimes we have neither in seasons of life. And so, yeah, I was also curious as to your thoughts. I wanted to ask you both, on the I Thirst chapter and where we went with that and what that, meant to both of you.
Yeah. Shall I?
So, yeah, Dr. Randa, please, yes.
That was actually one of my favorite chapters. There's a lot of talk about self-care in psychology right now. And I love how you described all the different areas that we do have to take care of yourself. I actually wrote down a quote from that chapter. And can I read it? Can I read your words back to you for everyone?
Yes, do remind us.
Because I just love it. I think it's spot on. You wrote, "Self-care is not about indulging ourselves. It's about making the choice to build a lifestyle that better supports our ability to live more in the image of Christ."
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That's one of our favorite lenses on self-care.
And I think that in that chapter, you cover all the different areas of self-care: emotional, spiritual, physical, and you do that in depth. And what you do in each chapter, which I appreciate very much, is that you really take us through a process, right? It's almost a before, during, and after, whether you're talking about the process of forgiving someone or taking care of yourself, or how do you really connect with another human being. That connection chapter was another one of my favorites. And it puts a whole new look at self-care than what you might see in popular psychology, which is very, can be very self-centered. But when you frame it around a purpose of, you're doing this not just for yourself, but for others,
absolutely,
to emulate and shine your light of Christ. It's really inspiring, I thought.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Randa.
Yeah, I would just add, being at a seminary and teaching at a seminary for nearly 25 years now, and then being a student at a seminary as well, I think one of the great contributions of the mental health profession has been an awareness of self-care. And I think what Ocamper does, what clergy are doing now, Dr. Roxanne, what you do, is really a recognition that the woe is me, the world is falling in on me, and that's how I should be a Christian and suffer is, okay, maybe in some saints' lives it works, but for the vast majority of us, it doesn't really work. And I think it's been one of the great contributions of the 20th century to theological discipline, to really rethink about what it means to minister to yourself. And to take care of yourself. So I'm very glad. I really love the chapter. And again, for me, it also reminded me, though, of how human Jesus is as well. Yeah.
Yeah. The moment of asking for something to drink. I mean, it just, that was the most human example. That and the why have you forsaken me. I mean, to me, those are the two most like, wow, I can relate to you, Lord. I mean, I can't, but I can. In those moments, in the most human look at his vulnerability, which just makes what happened to him so much more.
Yeah. And even just I mean, for you to say that I'm thirsty, as the one who moves the sun out of the way, at his final breath. I mean, I just, it's unbelievable, and it's like how we say in the, at the baptism services, that great are your works, O Lord, and there are no words that are sufficient to sing about how wonderful you are. I mean, how wonderful our God is, that he just takes on us, takes on the flesh, takes on something that is like nothing, and he becomes that. He gives us life through his death, and to me that thirst was so powerful for us to write too, because I think, and this Dr. Skedros as well, sometimes I think we get caught up in this idea that it needs to be so hard, and to deprive ourselves. And yes, there's a beauty to that. We need to take up our cross. We need to be identifying what are the struggles that we face in our life. And we're not in any way minimizing that. But I do think that sometimes it can come at the cost of us taking care of ourselves. And more importantly, as we talk about in the chapter, our ability to minister to the people that God has put in our life. I mean, we can't be the ministers that God wants us to be if we're not taking care of ourselves. And
right, as we talked about, even in the connection chapter, that connection is such an intuitive process, right? That we can tell whether somebody is safe to approach, or safe to draw near to, safe to love, and we can also tell when they're not. And many a times when we're not taking care of ourselves in stress, we push away the very people that we need, because we become somebody that unravels quickly, that is agitated, and that is, does not give up a vibe that says it's safe to approach. And so it makes the connection chapter very hard to engage if we're not taking care of ourselves or we're using willpower. So I'm glad that that was the lens that you guys saw on it. That was the goal.
And I also want another plug, though, is, and I'm not saying it is an important plug, I think, because we don't focus sort of on the 7 sayings of Jesus as Orthodox Christians. And I think what you've done is you've brought that to our attention as Orthodox Christians. It's obviously in our scripture, it's in our hymnology, but the thirst part, I can't think of a lot of people talking about it, Orthodox theologians or even, patristic authors. I can't say definitively, but I think you've brought that to the fore in an important way. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I remember, on one such occasion when, early on in our, as being a priest, and Roxanne, you'll remember this, when George, our son, had come up to us, and this really became something that has become so core in my own ministry. Is my son George was only about 6 years old, and we were dealing with some struggles in the parish. And long story short, he said to me, he said, "Baba, you're a better priest to the people than you are to us." And it was one of those lines that, out of the mouths of children, that just hit me at the knees. And I thought, here I am, trying to take care of a church and not taking care of my own church, and that being of the family. And I was just running on fumes. And we see that, and so often, we're living in a society that is always telling us that more work, more is better, more is better. And one thing is clear in our church tradition, and obviously we tried our best to kind of put this into the book, was the importance of stillness, the importance of quieting ourselves down, the importance of just taking that moment to recognize what do I need? Not what do I want, but what do I actually need? What is my body physically and emotionally telling me that I need, and spiritually telling me that I need? So that was something that was very, I think, hopefully powerful and also impactful for the reader as well. I do want to encourage all of you that are tuning in. You're more than welcome to call in and speak with Dr. Randa or Dr. Skedros or to us. We're talking about our brand new book, 6 Hours and 7 Lessons, How Christ's Light Transcends Our Darkness. The book actually came out today on March 19th, and you can find it at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com, or on Amazon.com. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side of this break, we're also going to continue the conversation with Dr. Randa and Dr. James Skedros, as well as bring on another one of our endorsers in Bob Krantz. So stay right with us.
Live with the Louhs with Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne will be back in a moment. Give them a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. They would love to hear from you.
During his darkest moments on the cross, Jesus uttered 7 statements. His words offer us principles to live by, lessons of hope, peace, and comfort. I'm Dr. Roxanne Lowe.
And I'm Father Nicholas Lowe.
And our new book, 6 Hours, 7 Lessons, is all about how Christ's light transcends our darkness.
Christ's final words have the power to bring us into the light of his love and protection, providing wisdom and direction to follow when we face our own dark seasons. Get your copy today by going to store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Live with the Louhs and Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne. Do you have a question for the Louhs? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here once again is Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Live with the Louhs. So grateful that you're joining us this evening. We are so blessed that today, on March 19th, we are releasing our brand new book, 6 Hours, 7 Lessons, How Christ's Light Transcends Our Darkness. And we are so fortunate to have just some amazing friends of ours, people that are just true supporters of our ministry, but more importantly, just godly people. We're honored to have Dr. Randa Anderson. She is the president of the Orthodox Christian Association of Medicine, Psychology, and Religion. She's also a dear, dear friend of ours and a clinical psychologist. Dr. James Skedros as well is with us. He's a professor at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology, as well as an adjunct professor at Harvard Divinity School. And also we have our beloved Bob Krantz, Robert Krantz, who is a director, producer, writer, actor. He is someone that gives so much of his own ministry, his platform, to writing and producing and acting in Christian films. And many of you know some of the more recent ones are A Marriage Made in Heaven, as well as Faith, Hope, and Love. Just great stuff. And so, Bob, welcome to Live with the Louhs. It's great to have you with us.
It is so, first of all, it's great to see you guys and to see you together. I usually just get Father, but I got both of you today. And it's a treat, I'm telling you. I don't know if you all know this, but I just saw Father. He came out here to speak in Irvine. It was just fantastic. And
Thank God.
We had such a great time together. It really was just really beautiful. And people got to see him live and in person, and it was great. And finally, I get to talk about your book. I was so nervous on all our podcasts and stuff. I kept thinking, oh, I'm going to let it slip. And so I would text him and say, can I say anything? Not yet. So thank God you guys did a phenomenal job. As always, it was such a beautiful book. And if I had to say one word, it was thorough. I mean, boy, you two, it is so in depth. I think I did mention on one of our podcasts, the chapter on forgiveness was, I think, over 50 pages long. And that could have been, it was, and Father, you've talked about this, and subsequently I've thought about it, that when you send out to your parish, like, what do you want people to talk about? That forgiveness is the number one thing. And I was so surprised by that. I thought it'd be something entirely different. So when I saw your book really delved into that, my initial instinct was I wanted to go back and start rereading, but I knew I had to get to the end of the book. So I had to keep going. But that would be the first thing I would reread, that chapter, because I think on one of the pages it says, I believe Christ in the Bible, is Christ or God in the Bible mentions forgiveness 490 times. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was so powerful. And in my own life, I've said to my wife, what connotates forgiveness? And you guys covered all of it. And so
I think one of the things that we were trying to be really intentional with, and thanks again, Bob, for your beautiful words. I told Roxanne before we got on the show, I did not want this to be a just a complimentary, show on the Louhs, because there's these boxes that we're on, these Brady Bunch boxes that we're on the screen will not be able to control our heads as they expand, throughout the show. But I mean, our prayer is obviously that the book obviously inspires and motivates people in their walk of faith. And I think for one of the things that we talk about with forgiveness, Bob, as you know very well, is, the vertical always shapes the horizontal, and we talk about this in the book, that our vertical relationship with God helps to the horizontal relationship we have with others. And I think so often we think when we talk about forgiveness, we have just a really wrong understanding about it, that that it becomes so much about the other person who's offended us. And that's, obviously that's part of it, but, we argue that forgiveness is not so much about who's hurt you, but who can heal you, and allowing, and remembering the words of C.S. Lewis. He said that, to be a Christian is to forgive the inexcusable in others because God first forgave the inexcusable in us. And so I love how, at least the way the scriptures reflect it, chronologically, it is the first statement that is recorded in the Bible. Now, whether or not that was actually the first statement or not, none of us really know, but at least for the scriptures purposes, of which Christ was guiding all of that, it is the very first statement. And I think it's so important that how we begin Lent with Forgiveness Sunday. We begin, as we're launching into Lent, the last Sunday as we're ushering in, that is a Forgiveness Sunday. Then we have a Forgiveness Sunday Vespers that is so powerful. I remember Dr. Skedros, when we were at the seminary, how powerful that particular service was, that just really is when everyone is greeting each other and saying, may God forgive us both. I mean, just this beautiful reconciliation that we have between one another and obviously with God. And so, Bob, and I'd love to hear from all of you on this, but Bob, you are so engaged, not only in the world of television and media, and you're also so using your platform for, making a
tremendous ways to give God glory. I mean, it's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, when you read this book, for the average, Christian who is just, who may not even be part of the Orthodox Church, by the way, just simply maybe, one of your viewers that watches your movies. I mean, what do you think? What would be a way that, how beneficial could this be in their own lives, especially when they're facing their dark seasons?
I can tell you two words that you always say: practical Christianity. A lot of books that I've read, I'm trying to get through one now on the Divine Liturgy, and it reminds me, those books remind me of when I used to interview the priests when we were doing the saints. And I would ask them, the saints videos, St. George, St. Nicholas, St. Catherine, so forth. And I would ask the priest a question, and they would say, I'd ask the question, they'd go, well, that's because of our Lord and Savior, Heavenly Father, guidance of all light, blah, 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 Jesus Christ. I said, just say Jesus. It's too much. There's too much. Like, just say Jesus. You lost me at heavenly, blah, 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 blah. And that's why when you guys say practical Christianity, I go, I can relate to it. And it's a beautiful mix between the two of you. It's a powerful mix between the two of you, because you have real life adaptation to what you're talking about. To me, it's that practical Christianity. It's what I always look at when I look at social media. If I'm going to put something out on social media, or if I'm going to make a movie, the first thought I have is, what is the viewer going to get out of this? That's why if you go to social media, you won't see a lot of social media being, all that stuff. I look and go, what is that? Like, what are you posing for? What is somebody going to get out of that? And so I find when I read all of your stuff, it's practical. From your previous book, what do I do every morning now? 15 minutes reading the Bible, 30 minutes reading the Bible. The first 15 to God. It's practical. And to me, that's where I think you guys capture the spirit of people, is somebody wants something that's practical to their life now. And that's what I found. And, the whole book, I think, is just also too, this is the other thing I wanted to say. I've been there with both my parents when they passed away. And when your parents or somebody you love dearly is passed away, you're not talking about sports. You're not talking about some small thing. You get down to like the hey, this is the last things I want to say to you. And it's rough. I mean, that's never a fun thing. But I thought your book captured that. And it reminded me, I had never looked at the last moments of Christ and thought, wow, those weren't just throwaway lines. Those weren't just, I'm finished, I thirst. Every one of those things had a practical meaning to it. And I thought that was beautifully captured. And I think will resonate with people because I think it'll be applicable to so many lives. And that's where you really hit home, I think, in your guys' book, is when you can have things that are applicable to so many people's lives, that's when I think you'll get a lot of people reading it. And I also think, as I've told you guys before, I would put this on YouTube too, talking about specific sections of the film, because I think people will go there. For example, if you talk about forgiveness or I thirst or whatever, I think people will go there, and I think you'll be stunned. I know I've been at the multitude of people that will tune in to learn what you've talked about from around the world. That is, as I think I told you, Faith, Hope, and Love has gone over 1 million views in a year, and it's still going. Wow. And it's people from all countries. And I think I say this to you guys privately, I say it to you guys publicly. I think the two of you are on that course to become national kind of spokesman for not just the Orthodox faith, but faith in general. And I'm going to add one last thing to that. I know, I said this to Father when he was out here, this season you're in right now, I believe you have your 2 children, and I think God is not going to let that next step happen until those 2 children go to college. But I think that makes this season your season of refining, developing, understand. And so it's a huge, because once you get to that next step, you can't, you're not going to be going back and going, okay, now wait, how should we handle this one? Well, you'll write this, by then you want to have that, that thing down. But I think you guys are on your way to it.
I appreciate that. You're so kind.
That's what I think.
I love you. I love you so much.
And that's been your story too, Bob. What you've been able to accomplish in your ministry is incredible and has always impressed us with what you do in Hollywood. I mean, this is not easy to do in a, in the most worldly driven place in the world. You are taking something and giving God glory through everything you do. And so that's such an inspiration to us. Because as we said, and this is really where the book is sort of echoing this, that even something as basic as forgiveness, we've heard about it our entire life. We say it in our Lord's Prayer. You can't go a day as a Christian and not hear about it. However, if an injustice happens, if somebody offends us, it's as if our mind shifts gears like this. And we forget all of that. We forget the narrative.
It's so true.
And it's like quick. It's quick.
That's so
and
true.
So that's why forgiveness was 50 pages. I mean, that's why it was so long, because it's so hard. We take it for granted and we say it, but it's really, I know, Dr. Randa, you've probably worked with family conflicts that have been going on 5 years.
Or longer.
Longer. We see relationships severed.
Longer. Yeah.
All for lack of being able to do this one thing. And in this most profound statement, Christ teaches us, if we look at what he says when he says, Father, forgive them, he gives us the most miraculous cure. He says, because they don't know what they're doing. And isn't that the case with everyone who hurts us? They don't really know what they're doing. And even if they did, what kind of life had they had leading up to it that would have taught them to know different? Like they really don't know what they're doing. And that sort of prompt for empathy to enter somebody else's story, to better understand their lens. I was like, wow, Christ, in that you're dying and you're suffering and you gave us that, like, whoa. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, the
second part is more important than the first, right? It's the how.
I think it's one of those things too. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Father had a classic. I don't know if this was yours that you made up or you got it from somewhere, but when you don't forgive somebody, it's like lighting yourself on fire
Oh yeah, that's
They,
yeah.
they die from smoke inhalation. That to me, but that's that.
Yeah, that's not me. That's
That's a good nugget, good illustration.
It was so perfect. It was like that other person doesn't know. It's you that's dying. That's you're killing yourself by keeping all that inside of you. And I thought that was so brilliant.
Yeah.
Dr. Skedros, I'm sorry, Dr. Randa, please go ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback on that because what stuck out to me is how you said, don't let your emotions be a directive of how to treat other people. And I thought that was spot on too. Similar. Yeah, don't light that fire.
Father, there was one other thing you said that I have found since you said it. It's helped see other people the way that Christ sees them.
Exactly.
You know, when you're just at that moment where you're like, oh, and you just go, no, you know what? And then I would add one other piece to it, the Robin Williams part. If you want to mention what that was, Father, I thought that was
I was sharing how the comedian Robin Williams, who sadly we know took his own life, shortly before he took his own life, had said that everyone is fighting a battle that we have no idea about. You know, and that's just so true. Dr. Skedros, I know we only have a few minutes left to the show, but I did want to talk about the second statement where we hear Christ tell the thief at the cross that today you're going to be with me in paradise. And we kind of took that role within that chapter to kind of talk a great deal about us studying our own selves, recognizing what areas of our life that we struggle with, what are the strongholds as we talk about in the book, and what we hear often throughout the scripture. I'd love to kind of just talk a little bit about how our church, the traditions within our church, the studying of ourselves, the gnotis auton, how we say it oftentimes, the studying of ourselves is so central in our Christian faith, because I think we kind of sometimes we can make our faith sometimes to be so academic where we know it up here, and maybe sometimes we can do especially during Lent, we see a lot of this where we do a lot of the externals, but we don't really look at that transformation internally. How important, do you think theologically it is for us to constantly, not just once, but constantly be struggling to study ourselves?
So even though Jesus doesn't say this on the cross, but if we go back to his words in other contexts, he's talking on the cross about, the thief says, remember me in your kingdom, when you come into your kingdom. And he responds, today you'll be with me in paradise. But earlier, Jesus tells us that the kingdom of heaven is within. And he begins his ministry, John the Baptist starts, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Jesus picks up those words in the Gospel of Mark. So Jesus begins his public ministry with repentance, but then with the statement, God's kingdom is at hand. And he ends his public ministry on the cross by talking about the question that the thief says, don't forget me in your kingdom. And Jesus says, don't worry, today I haven't forgotten you. The message of Christ's kingdom, Christ came to announce his kingdom, but it's not the kingdom that you and I are looking for in this world. But it is a kingdom in the heart. And it's interesting that Jesus chooses on the cross to say, today you will be with me in paradise, not in the kingdom. I find that odd. I've been thinking a little bit about that as I went back and reread parts of your book and thinking about why doesn't he say you'll be with me in my kingdom? He says in paradise. I don't know I don't know exactly why the shift there, other than maybe to remind us that the kingdom isn't of this world, even though we want to make the kingdom of this world. But back to your point, though, and the point of that chapter really is to look within. We focus so much on the externals. And Christ does say it doesn't matter. It's what's in your heart, and it's what you do with what's in your heart that will ultimately matter. For the kingdom of heaven is within. It's not without. And Lent is that. What is Lent other than a series? Lent is, as you said earlier, Father, you didn't quite say it this way, but I think it's what you wanted to say was that what I heard anyway was Lent is a reminder of how we should live as Christians. Too often we talk about Lent as a journey, and we're on this journey to get to Pascha. Lent really is just a reminder to say this is how we're supposed to live.
Right.
This is how we live, and
it's getting back to
what we're supposed to. getting back to the basics. And the church in its wisdom gives us the opportunity to do it because God knows we don't do it on our own. And so the church reminds us to do it. And what's one of the basics? Find out who you are. Find out find out the person. And so much of our modern sensibilities today is, what's my story? This is my story. What's your story? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's actually something very healthy about it, because in a very real sense, God created us in a unique way. And our calling is to find out who that person God created us to be. And how do we do that? We have to turn in. We have to turn in.
Study ourselves. And we really wanted in that chapter to sort of capitalize, on, not blaming everyone else for what we struggle with, to really look within, identify what's there, but also not get caught up on this sort of, and I'm sure you've seen this, Dr. Randa, in your practice too, but this unproductive guilt, once you discover something that's there, because that also can become its own stronghold that kind of blocks us, creating all kinds of secondary emotions where we don't actually solve anything because we're so, guilty and sort of victimized in that process. And so hopefully that, you all were able to kind of, feel that in that chapter of sort of looking within. It shouldn't be a scary thing to do. And though I think for many, it can be.
Dr. Randa, I'd like to ask, as we're kind of closing out the show, just some parting words for our listeners about the book, anything that you feel would be, just some final words. And I actually would like to ask all three of you those questions as we kind of close out our show tonight.
Well, it's part theology and it's part psychology, and it's entirely useful. And I hope that everyone will, again, engage with it. Don't just read it and leave it on your shelf. Read it once, then pick out the parts that really resonate and reflect on them and engage with them, and hopefully use the book to be a better you and grow closer to Christ and to the people around you.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Skedros?
I have two thoughts. One is, I wonder, and I'm not a priest, I'm not a psychologist, but I wonder to what extent what the guidelines and the working through of these really important issues that deal with our spirituality, with our relationship with Christ and ourselves and others, how the book could be used individually. In other words, in counseling sessions, in confession sessions, one-on-one, as you walk somebody through a series of challenges they might have. But my second one is more practical for me, in the sense that I'm going to use it in my the parish that I attend here in the Boston area. I do a Lenten series, a book every Lent, and we'll do this next year. Because the reason why is we'll do it once a week, because it focuses, it's a very Lenten theme, obviously, on Good Friday, but it's very practical as well. And as has been said many times tonight, it does both so wonderfully. It puts our theology into proxies and reminds us that theology without proxies is just babbling.
That's right. Thank God. And
Thank God.
And Bob, you've got unfortunately about 120 seconds.
Oh no! Oh God! Okay. Well, I'm going to echo what everyone pretty much just said. It's the balance of the two voices, and it's something that it's not one of those books you just kind of flip through. It's a very thorough. It is you both, thorough, well thought out, and it's one of those things that you would take time reading and going through each section of it. I think that to me was what I would recommend for people. And without, I think it's a book that I would give away as a gift to people too, because it's such a rich, and by rich I mean deep book. I just think that's so beautiful I hope I don't run out of time, but at 1/22 thing, I learned a lesson from Father Lowe, and it was so brief, but it was such a good lesson. When he came here, I hadn't seen him for ages, so I came up and I hugged him before he was about to speak. Do you remember what happened? I know you won't.
You remind me.
What happened? I hugged him, and I was on to the next thing. I'm like, hey, how you doing? And I went to pull away, and he held me, and he said,
oh, yes.
He said,
don't let go.
What did you say?
Don't let go.
Enjoy, remember the moment. And it really stopped me. I thought, yeah, there I was, going to the next moment already. Did we get a seat? And I thought, it really made me put the brakes on things and go, hey, enjoy the moment.
I love you. I love you so much, Bob. And thank you, Bob. Thank you, Dr. Randa and Dr. Skedros.
All of you.
Yeah, we can't thank you enough. I mean, just for taking the time tonight, but really taking the time to, you guys.
Time to read it all,
to
because
read
it was
the book.
long.
Yes. And not only to read it, but to offer such great words of wisdom and encouragement for us. And our prayer at the end of the day for our listeners is, just like with Renewing You, we just hope that at the end of the day, we're just using our gifts that God has given us for His glory. That's what this is all about. It's not about the Louhs. It's not about us, the two of us.
Right.
It's basically telling, in some small way, trying to encapsulate the true love that God has for all of you and for us. And so I encourage you, you can find the book. Again, it's 6 hours, 7 lessons. Half of the proceeds, by the way, go to the American Cancer Society, and the other half go to our outreach ministries and at our parish at St. John the Divine. You can find and purchase this book at store.ancientfaith.com or on Amazon.com. And it's, as our beautiful guest mentioned, it's a great gift as well, and definitely a read to have during this Lenten season. Next week, we will be having a brand new guest. We have Sylvia Farage that's going to be on, a clinical psychologist going to be talking with us next Tuesday about an important topic. We'll do that up for next Tuesday, but it's a brand new show. And we want to thank Matushka Trudy, as always, for producing tonight's show, and all of you for taking the time to be with us. God bless you all, and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with The Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.